welcome to today's tutorial. So in this video we are going to look at DOM and DOM manipulation. So in the previous video we looked at arrays, we looked at array methods, we looked at strings and string methods and other fundamentals. In today's video we are starting to look at the superpowers of JavaScript. Okay, so this has been the long waited video, and people were always asking me, when are we going to start making things in HTML? When are we going to start doing things in HTML, manipulating CSS and doing all those good stuff? So today marks the beginning of those days. We are going to enjoy manipulating the DOM. So let's start with looking at what is the DOM. So the DOM can be defined in multiple ways. Even when you search online, you will find a lot of definitions, how everyone is defining the DOM. The info of the word DOM is actually document object model. Okay, so there are very many definitions, but let's go through to break it down to understand what it exactly means. So the DOM in the first definition is a web API. So if it is your first time to hear the word API, API is application programming interface. Okay, so is a web API that allows developers to use programming logic to make changes to their HTML code. And I think this is really it. Like in the DOM we have access to HTML and we can manipulate it. Okay, so it is a reliable way to make changes that turn static websites into dynamic ones. Okay, this is where all the magic happens. The document object model is a programming interface for HTML document. It represents the structure of a document as a tree of objects, with each object representing part of the document. And this is also true. So in the DOM we have access from the whole HTML code, how it looks like, from HTML to the head to the elements you have inside. We have access to all of them in the DOM. Okay, so let's keep on breaking it down. So you could also say document object model is a structured representation of HTML documents, allows JavaScript to access HTML elements and styles to manipulate them. So as we had said, so if you look on the side here, let me select my pen. So if you look on the side here, for instance, we have document, we have elements, and if you look closely, you set on the element you have like HTML, the head, the body, those are elements, title, section, paragraphs, all those ones are elements. Then we have text, which is like a paragraph, a real paragraph, and a second paragraph. So you can imagine on the p tag itself is an element, but inside the p tag we have a text. Okay, yeah, so let's continue breaking this down. So this is more good way to look at it. Okay, so you can imagine we normally call this a DOM tree structure. So what is a DOM tree structure? As you can see, it is a representation of the whole HTML. So the whole HTML, this one that is in purple, you can see this is the whole document. This is the whole index.html. Okay, so like this whole page here is what we actually call a document. Okay, so special objects, that is the entry point to the DOM. Okay, so we always, the entry point to the DOM or to these elements here in the HTML, the entry point is actually the document on the top here. So when you have the document, you are referring actually to the whole HTML document. So whatever you're going to be talking about in JavaScript, something to do with the document. Okay, So in the document, we are referring actually to the whole HTML. So from the document, we can select elements. Okay, you can see that from the document, you move down to the element. So the elements are these ones, everything you have been seeing, the tags. Okay, so the p tag is an element, the div is an element, the body is an element, the head is an element, image is an element. All those ones we have been using. The anch tag is an element. So all those ones we have been using are actually elements. So you can see the elements you can have. The HTML tag, this one is an element, head is an element, those are the tags, body is an element, title is an element, section, like this section is an element, and then paragraph is an element. And you can see that this text we have inside is actually referred to as text. So like from the element here, we have actually the text. If you look at the tree here, the DOM tree, in the element, like in the head, which is the element, we have the title. So if you look inside the head, we have the title, which is also an element. And then when you look inside the title, we have actually a text, which is saying a simple page, and you can see it here, a simple page. And then when you continue, for instance, a section here has an element. For instance, there's one section, we have two sections, so we have this section here and this section here. So in this section, the first section, you see we have two paragraphs. We have two paragraphs, this one and this one. Okay, and the paragraphs themselves are elements. If you look at them, the paragraphs are elements, and inside the paragraph we have, you can see in the one paragraph we have some text and an anch tag. So you see in this paragraph we have an anch tag, which is this one, and then we also have a text, which is this one, a paragraph with a link. So you can see here a link, and inside this anch tag we can see we have a text. So this is what we call a tree. Okay, we call it a DOM tree. So a DOM tree is how you navigate all the elements. You start with the HTML, and you can see it is on top here. Inside the HTML we have two parts. We have the head and we have the body. Okay, like so. And inside the body, then we have all these other things. All this other tree, all of it originates from the body here. Okay, so this is the beginning. We are going to continue, and I will be reflecting to this page all the time. Okay, so then we have seen what a DOM is. We have seen a DOM is just like is an interface, or is a structure where we can access our HTML elements, and then we can talk to them. So what is DOM manipulation? So DOM manipulation is when you use JavaScript to add, remove, and modify elements in the HTML and CSS. In other words, the website, actually, because HTML and CSS, they make your website. With JavaScript, it is with superpowers. So now in the DOM manipulation is actually just like we are trying to modify elements the way we want them, to add that interaction that we have been talking about all the time. Okay, so we are right in. So in the first step in the DOM manipulation, we are going to look at how do we create elements. Okay, how do we create elements using JavaScript? It is so cool. It is so cool to see that you can actually create elements from JavaScript. You do not need even to write anything in the HTML. You can write your elements from JavaScript, and we are going to look at this so many times, and I think we'll do even one application on this. So to create a new element in the DOM using JavaScript, you can use the create element method of the document object. So the document itself, as we said, it is a DOM API or is a web API. So there are some methods, or there are some sort of functions that the object, the document itself, because remember the DOM in full, I will remind you, let me write here. So the DOM in full is document. So you can see here, the first thing is actually document. Okay, document object. Okay, document object model. Okay, so this document here, this one here, we are referring on, which is our HTML code or our HTML document, is having some methods on it, or it has some functions that we can access and use to manipulate the DOM. Okay, so the first method you're going to look at is called create element method. Okay, so this method takes a string argument representing the type of element to create. So if you remember very well, we have talked about functions, that's why it makes sense now. So this create element is a function, or it is a method, and it takes in a string. And we also know the strings at this point. So it takes in a string such as a div. So if you want to create a div, you pass in a string saying a div. If you want to create a p tag, you create a p. If you want to create h1, you pass in h1. It returns a new element object that you can modify and append to the document. Okay, so in this case, they say document refers to the current HTML document. So look at this. The document we are referring here in this is actually the HTML document. As I've been mentioning, it is the HTML document that you are currently in, or you are currently working at. Okay, that is being displayed in the browser. Okay, the document object is a property of the window object. Okay, so now we have a second term which says a window object. So don't worry about it, we are going to be keep on breaking them down. So the second one is, now we have seen the window object. We are saying the document object is a property of the window object. Okay, so the window is actually is on top or on higher level than the document. Okay, and represents the HTML document as a whole. So you can see even the window is actually still referring to the HTML document, but is actually on top. Okay, so now let's see how we create an element. So for instance, if we wanted to create a div, okay, if we wanted to create a div, so you can see this is the element we want to create. So remember, our objective is to create a div. So if we wanted to create a new div element in our HTML, we would say, for instance, the first thing is const. You can use const, or you can use var, or you can use late, any can work. The new div is document. So we are accessing the document, or we are calling the document, and this one refers to the current HTML. Okay, this refers to the current HTML document. Okay, our current HTML document that is displayed in the browser is what we are referring as the document. Okay, now in this HTML document we want to create an element, so it has this method called create element. So in the create element we pass in a div. Okay, so we pass in a string of the element we want to create. So you can see here we are passing in a div. Okay, Now, after I've created a div at this point, actually it is now existing, but it is, so this div now, when you do this, this div goes to the HTML at that point, okay? But then there's no I'm going to do. So if you wanted to create some content inside, okay, if you wanted to create that, to create some content or some text inside that new created div, so remember, if we wanted to create, let me just get maybe a snippet, okay, a snippet. Let me first go to VS Code, and I think I need to demonstrate this, so give me a minute. So let's go to our VS Code. So earlier on I set up, I would have my index.html and app.js, nothing like we have here, okay, nothing that we have here, and we have nothing inside the body, but I want to actually put a div, and inside I want to put the text says this is a new div, and actually I will remove it later. I'm just going to simply snip it. So let me snip this code. I could snip it this code. Maybe I would have tried the easy way, but let me just snip this. Okay, let me snip this. And in fact, let me just snip the whole of it. Okay, just take this, it will serve the purpose. Okay, so let's go back to this side here. I don't know if you can look at this. Okay, so you can see, let me zoom in. Okay, so, and let me put it on, try to move it up to the side here, so that we can look part of the core, the slide slightly. Okay, so now in what we are trying to say is that, let me grab a pen, let me get a yellow one, I like this blue one. So this document here is actually this whole document. Okay, this whole thing here is actually we refer to as the document. Okay, so this one, the current HTML that is currently displaying in the browser, is actually what we call our document. So this, when we are referring to say document, we are referring to this whole HTML. Okay, so the first line is document.createElement div. Okay, so in that case, we are trying to say on this element, create an element called div, and this is the div. At this point, we are trying to mean this div here. Okay, so when we want to create that div, we create it using this line of code. Okay, that is step number one. Step number two is we want to set this text inside this one. So the first one is you create an empty div. So when you create a div, it is empty, it has no text. In the second phase, you want to create this text inside the div. So you get the div that you created in the first place, which we named new div, and then we go to, there is a method on each of these elements. There is a method called inner HTML. Okay, so that is also another method, and this inner HTML is actually accessing this content here. Remember, when we access this content, at this point, this is an empty div and it has no content. So to populate it or to add something, we say new div.innerHTML is equal to this is a new div. Okay, so we give it this content. So remember, to set a content, we are going to see other methods of how you can set the text inside an element, but the easiest one is using the .inner HTML. Okay, so .inner HTML, just know you are accessing the text content of an element, and then you can actually set it to anything you want. Okay, so we have created our div, we have put into the text. Then how do we put it inside the body? Okay, so the last one is actually appending. So appending is actually meaning inserting. Okay, appending is like inserting or putting. So how do we append the new created div inside the body? Okay, so we use another method. Okay, so for instance, we first, to get to the body, is document dot body. So we are referring to this body. Okay, and then on the body there is one other method that we can use, which says append child. So at this point, let me reduce this so that we can look actually. So I've already talked about all this, so I'm just going to minimize this and put it aside here so that we look at all these things we have been talking of. So step number 1, we create a div. Okay, so this is number 1. We create an empty div. Step number 2, we put some text inside the div using the inner HTML. Step number 3, we append the newly created element to the body of the document. And we say document, remember this refers to the HTML document, dot body, so we are accessing the body, this one. And on that body, we call a method called append child. Okay? And this append child means it is appending a child inside here, and this one is the parent, this one is the child. So when you talk about an element and you say child, you actually mean that element inside it. So append child, and then you pass in the child you want to append, and we are appending the newly created div. Okay, so can we try this? Can we try this in the let's try this in the VS Code. Okay, so so here I'm just going to first say alert working, so that we know that our so that we test our JavaScript if it is completely working perfectly. Sorry, I'm just going to go here, right click, open in the browser. So you would have also clicked on go live. It is the same thing, right clicking here and open with live server, and clicking here go live. They are the same thing. Okay, and you can see here the alert, it is working. So this is great. Okay, so this is great, and we have, this is a new div. We are going to remove it in a minute. So I'm just going to drop this down like so, so that it is in its own stuff, and then I can close this one. I guess I don't no longer need this one, so that will remain with one we can look at very well. Okay, so finally it has gone. They can put this up, or you can just simply click here. So let's go to the console. Okay, so right now in the body we have this is a new div, and you are going to remove this because this one was removed, was created manually. Want to see the one we are going to create with JavaScript. So currently we have this div in the body. I want you to pay attention, and I'm removing it. So if you go now back to the browser, we have nothing. There is nothing, only our JavaScript saying alert. Okay, so let me remove this. So we are on the DOM manipulation. So let me just go down here and let me create some blades here. So we are on the DOM manipulation. Okay, and the first method we are looking at creating elements. So we are creating elements. Okay, we are creating elements, and inside this element, okay, we are looking at a method. So we are looking at a number of methods, but the one we are looking at is called create element. Okay, create element. So you're looking at a method called create elements in creating the elements. So we said there are 3 steps. Okay, so step number 1, create the element. Okay, step number 2, remember this is a comment. Step number 2, put some text inside the element. So here you can populate some text. Populate some text inside the newly created element, inside the element. And step number 3, append the element to the body. So here step number 3 is append the element to the body. Okay, so let's go to step number 1. So step number 1, want to create a new div. So I could just say const new div. Okay, can give it any name, by the way. New div is, so we access the document. Remember, that is the current document open in the browser, and this is referring to this document. I want to remind you, this is referring to this document that is currently open in the browser, and it's a document, and on this document we call a method called create element. You can see there are very many methods, but the one we want right now is actually create element. Okay, and create element method takes in one parameter, which is the what you want to create. You want to create a div. Okay, so if you run this line of code, it creates a div, an empty div. So this one just simply creates an empty div. Okay, the second one, the second step we are doing after you have done that, so get the newly created div, which is new div. Okay, so you get this new div, and then we call a method on it called inner HTML. Okay, inner HTML, this one accesses its text content. Okay, we have another one we are going to see is also called text content, but for now let's keep it simple and use the inner HTML. Okay, and we can set this one to, this is our new div. Okay, this is our new div. So at this point we are getting this newly created div, and we are giving it some text inside. Okay, of course you would create even another element like a p tag, and we could append it inside here. We are going to do all those beautiful things, never mind. Okay, so now step number 3, append the element to the body. Okay, so now in the first place, so first if I say document, on the document we can access the body. Okay, and on the body we can access a method called append child. And which child do we want to append? It is the new div, like so. So if we run this code now, we should see in the browser a div saying this is our new div. Simply like that, look at that, guys, in the browser here. Okay, I want you, let me zoom in. Maybe you guys are not seeing very well, but this is so cool. Okay, I can just zoom this to maybe 150 and you look at it very well, and you can see here this is a new div. This div in HTML is actually not there, is created from JavaScript. Are you seeing that? This is very powerful and you're going to see why. So if you go back to the elements and you go inside the div here, and you see that actually we have here our div appended inside the body. Are you seeing that? We have a div here appended to the body, and it is just this JavaScript that is actually doing the magic. So congratulations, you have done your first magic with your with JavaScript. This is so good and is going to be powerful because all concepts will be originating from this. Okay, so this is great. Let's look at more stuff, how we can add in, for instance, a class. How would we add in a class? How would we add in an ID to it so that we target it in HTML? Okay, so let's move on. So here now you can also set, if you look at this note, let me zoom in and let me grab a pen here. So you can also set other properties of the element, such as its class name, ID, using the corresponding properties of the element object. So we have seen this step. Step number 1, create a div using the create element method. In the second step, we look at setting the inner element. Okay, so you know this one, new div.inner HTML. New div.inner HTML, this is a new div element. So we have done this step, we know it. So this step we are good, this step we are good. Now if we want to set a class, we use new div.class name. So there is a method called class name and you can set a class. Okay, the second one is new div.id. You can also add an ID. Okay, and then last, you can append this div to the body. Okay, so let's modify that. Let's add in a class and an ID to the created element. Okay, so now, so before we append it, so at this point we have put the text inside. So we can add more steps. So let's add step number 3 now, and let's add a class. So add a class if you want it. So adding a class is new div dot class name. So there is a method called class name is equal to let's say my class. Just keep it simple. Okay, then the next one, let's add an ID. So here add an ID, and by the way, these ones, I'm very sure you know that these are comments. I put these comments so that you can understand the code properly and well. Okay, so adding an ID is new div, okay, dot ID. Okay, and we can give this ID a name, for instance, my ID, like that. And in the last method, which is step number 5 now, I guess this is 3, 4, this is 4, and now this one becomes 5, appending the created div to the body. So let's go back to the browser and check. So if you look at the div, here on the tab of elements, we have been looking, we have the console, it has nothing. But look at the elements now, which are actually elements in the HTML document. You look at the div we have created, it has a class, my class, and ID, my ID. And these are actual classes actually. So if I wanted to show you that we can create here a style.css, let's create style.css and let's link to it. So on top here, let me link to my CSS, style.css, and let me go here and I first do this padding 0, margin 0, box sizing, border box, just to do a browser reset quickly. Okay, now on the new line, okay, on the new line we can say my class. So we could target these classes and we give them something. For instance, my class, let's say text, let's say color. So this is my class, let's say it is adding color, which is red, and let's also say it adds font size to rem. Okay, only setting like this and going back to the browser, this is our new div. Look at that. So this class is actually an actual class that you can target in HTML, that you can target in HTML, and you do stuff like, you look at that. Okay, of course we can even do this in JavaScript. Okay, but I'm already showing you that you can have your class that you can append or you can add, and then in a CSS it responds. So you're now starting to see how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are starting to work together. Okay, so let's move on to more interesting parts. Okay, so we are now good with these steps, these 5 steps we have created. We created an element, we accessed its inner HTML and we changed it. We used .class name to add a class, .id to add an ID, and then lastly we used append child. So please, in your notebook, please note these things. I used to write these things. Please take a screenshot of that div, of that screen. That's why I write that PowerPoint, is to give you clearly how you can write your notes. Okay, so take notes, and that's how you can actually benefit. Write them with your pen. Don't even of course you have to learn them in the code them, but simply write them with your pen. Write them in a book. As you're writing them, you are getting those methods in your head. Okay, so now we looked at creating elements into the HTML code. So how about accessing elements? So what do we mean? How do we start accessing elements inside the DOM? Okay, how do we access elements inside the DOM? Okay, so now before we look at this method, so let me go to the DOM. Remember, inside the DOM right now, we actually don't have anything. The div that we were having, we're displaying it using using what? Using JavaScript. So let's create some elements. So for instance, I'm just going to create a section the way we normally do. I'm just going to create a section, and maybe let me call these sections hero section, hero section. Okay, and inside it, and let me give it also an ID at this point, and we could give it an ID called also hero section. Inside, I'm just going to create 2 things. Let me create h1, which says welcome to this is hub coding school. Okay, and then down here let me put a paragraph. Let me put a paragraph, and I'm just going to say Rorem 100. I don't know if that is too much. And I think at this point I would need my, okay, that is good. So down here let me create a button. Okay, so let me create a button and I call it join now. Okay, so if I go to you can see our new div is there, and then we have this old text all over the place. Okay, and even our button is there. So this is great. We have some text to work with. Okay, this is really great. So let's continue with now this the second module, or the second methods we are going to look at. So we first look at creating elements. So you can create new elements, but now let's look at accessing the elements that are in HTML. And this is more important, and we get even more closure. So there are several ways to access DOM elements using JavaScript. And the first one, and the easiest one of all, is the method called getElementById. And I like how these methods are very straightforward. Even the method we looked at before, createElement, you can hear it's the meaning of the method is in its name, createElement, which actually its purpose is to create an element. And even here, getElementById just means that get for me the element using the ID. That means that element must have an ID on it. So this method allows you to access an element by its unique ID attribute. So every time I've been talking and teaching during HTML CSS, I've been referring that the IDs will be more important when we reach in JavaScript. So this is actually the point where we start using those IDs. It returns a reference to the first element to the specified ID, or null if no element is found. Okay, so for instance, if I had access something, we could say const element is equal document. So this is the current HTML document. So on that HTML document, we have a method called getElementById, and it calls in that element ID. And for instance, we could say, for instance, a container is equal container, which is document.getElementContainer. So let's get maybe inside here to make it more nice. So all these ones inside the section, okay, inside the section, let's put all these ones inside a container. Up to here, it's always a good stuff. We'll just put a container here, and you can see I've put a class, but this time a container must have an ID. Okay, so you go ahead and put ID, and let's call it also container. Okay, you can of course give any name here, it has no problem, but the element we are going to use here, the element must have an ID if you are going to use getElementById. Okay, so let's go into let's go inside here. We in a VS Code. Okay, so this one was creating an element. Good. So here number 2 is accessing elements in the DOM. Okay, now and we are using a method. First right now is getElementById. Okay, So the first thing is, what do we want to access? One, we give it a name. So say const container element. I could just say that. So I want to access the container element. Okay, so I say is equal to container element is equal to document. So go to the HTML document using get element by ID, access an element whose ID is container. Okay, just as simple like that. We are accessing the container. Of course, you don't have to add this element if you don't want, but I'm just trying to refer. This is a container element actually, not the content inside, but the container element is equal document dot get element by ID, and you call this container, and this container is the ID that we gave here. It is the one that is used to identify this element in JavaScript. Okay, so now how do we know that we have selected it? We can console.log it. So I can console.log container element. Okay, so let's check in our console here. So you can look at the div. The whole div is here. The whole div, all of it is here. You see that? App.js line number 25 is actually outputting this div with the class and even the ID. This is very powerful. Okay, right now we can access an element, and you can see where we are heading to manipulating it. Okay, let's continue. So that is the one first method that we can use. We can use the ID of an element to access it. We can give even more examples. For instance, we could go ahead and give, for instance, these IDs to everything we have here. But let me just get this button. Let me give it an ID called join btn. Okay, just like to imitate that this is the join now. So this one I can call it join button. So I want to create to access this button using this ID. So I just go copy this one, and in the here we could just say const join button join btn is equal to document dot get element by ID, and the ID is join button. This ID here should be matching exactly this ID you have here on this button. Okay, now if you look at this is very interesting. Okay, if we console.log right now join button console.log join btn, if you go back to the browser, you can see now we have the join button. Okay, refresh this. You can see we have the join button here. The whole button has been selected, and this is very powerful, guys. We can manipulate these things here. We can start now manipulating text inside. We can start manipulating these things here. Okay, but let's keep it simple and move on. Okay, so at this point, you know how to create an element inside the DOM. You know how to access any element using its ID. Okay, so let's move on. So the second one is get element by tag name. Okay, so this method allows you to access all elements with a given tag name. It returns a collection of elements. Guys, I want you to start now hearing this, what it returns. In other previous methods were saying, let me first go back to this method. It returns a reference to the first element with a specified ID. Actually, to demonstrate that, wait a minute. to demonstrate that before we go on to the next one, let me put another button. Okay, so assuming we have or another button in maybe in some other section, so let's say this is in the maybe footer. Okay, and in the footer there is also another button which is exactly the same. You have seen those scenarios before, where you have like join button is on top, in the header is in the middle, and even so even in the header. Let me create a header here. So before this one, let me create a header, and we can also put this button. So we have how many instances? We have the first instance, the first button is there, the second one is here, and the third button is here. So you can have multiple buttons, of course, on the website saying the same thing, like join now or buy now or anything. But this get element by ID method, as we saw in the slide, to go back here, it says it returns a reference to the first element with the specific ID. Okay, or null if the element is not found. Okay, so if we go now to the browser and we refresh, we should have an element on top here and two buttons down here. So you have three buttons. So which button did they select? Do you see that? Only this one. These other two are not touched. So it selects the first instance. It selects the first instance of that, of the element with a specific ID. So if you had three buttons with all of them having this ID here, join button now, it will only select this first one here. So remember that always. Okay, but this second method, okay, this second method here we are looking at, which is get elements by tag name, and you can even hear the name of the you can hear the name of the element of the tag of the method itself is get elements. You see that? Get elements by tag name. So it means it returns a collection. Okay, so you're going to look at what is a collection. So a collection is just like an array. Okay, because arrays are a collection of elements. So when you say it returns a collection of elements, we are referring to something looking like an array with a specified tag name, or an empty collection if no elements were found. Okay, so you could get all the elements document by tag name P. Okay, you can access the first element in the collection using this bracket, and you remember this one is when you're accessing the first element in the array. So let's just jump in and look at that example. So since we have already our buttons, we're going to use the select all these buttons. So instead of using the ID to select them, we can use the tag name. Okay, so now I could just say const all buttons, const all buttons. Here how I'm putting it, all join buttons. All join buttons is going to be equal document dot get elements by tag name. Okay, get elements by tag what? By tag name. Okay, and that element you're talking about is a button. Okay, and you can see VS Code is also suggesting. So when you do this, let's console.log our output here, console.log all join btns. Okay, so if you console.log this one, look at that HTML collection with length 3. Okay, you can see HTML collection having 3 buttons. If we go inside, we have the first button, the second button, and the third button. You can see as I'm hovering here, it is actually selecting them this side. So you look at this, when I hover here, it shows you the first button, second one, and the third one. Okay, so you could select all elements using this one, and you see you have all of them. So if you wanted, you can see the first one is at index 1, index 0 is the first button. As you know, that arrays are 0 based, so you see that the index 0 have this 1 and 2. So to access, of course, to access the first button, so we could just say const, okay, or we could const.log it anyways, and we could just say or join btn's access the first button. Okay, so if we do that, you can see that we actually put the first button here. We have the first button. You get? So you can see we're starting to get actually things like an arrays here. You see how things are starting to be now interesting. Okay? Those who are asking how now do arrays get into HTML. We have now here an HTML array having 3 buttons, and we can access each button. We can do a for each loop. We can do a map here. Guys, you're starting now to see we're going to start seeing the magic here now with this kind of manipulation. So that is our second method. Okay, so in our second method, get elements by tag name. In the third one, get element by class name. Okay, get element by class name. Okay, so this method allows you to access all elements with a given class name. It returns a collection of elements. So I want to highlight this. It returns a collection of elements. Look at that. It returns a collection of elements with a specified class name, or an empty collection if no elements are found. Okay, so get all elements with a class name my class. So you say document.get element by class name. And I like these methods how they are in plural. You see that, guys? Elements, it is going to always remind you, am I selecting an element or elements? And all those methods are actually like that. Get element by class name. So for instance, we can have our paragraph. So let's go to our HTML this side. Okay, and let's have more. I'm just going to reduce instead on this paragraph, and instead make them 2. So let me make them maybe 3, and let's give them, for instance, a class. I would use a math selector here, where you press Alt and then click here, put a space, and I put a class, and I say section paragraph section paragraph. So I have this class. Let's leave this one without it, so that we see that it's going to select only 2 elements. So if I wanted to select these elements using a class, so we have seen you can select an element using an ID. You can select element using the tag. Okay, but right now we can also select using a class. So the third method here, so this was the second method here I didn't put. So method 2 is get elements by tag name. Now we are getting elements, get elements by class name. Okay, so I would say const paragraphs. I could say paragraphs or p tags. Okay, could you say section paragraph section paragraphs is equal to document dot get elements by class name. Get elements by class name, and you can pass in a class that you want to target, which is section paragraph. So you can see how interesting this is. Now you have very many choices, and we are going to be narrowing down which are the best choices. Okay, which are the most common ones. But at this point, I'm showing you all the possibilities. You can select an element in very many ways. So if we console.log section paragraphs, this one here, go to this side, you see you have HTML collection with you can see p section paragraphs, 2 of them. Okay, and you can also access, of course, you can access the first paragraph if you wanted. You can access the first paragraph. Let me just duplicate this one, and down here you could go here and select, for instance, the first one or the second one. This is not the first one, but the second one. You see the second one, and if you hover, you can see it is this one. Okay, so great. Let's move on. So another method, so you have looked at now, get element by class name. So the fourth is these 2 wonderful methods, and I think most of the times we are going to be using these 2 methods. Okay, you can use the other previous ones. I normally use them, but on day-to-day basis, you will find that the best methods are actually query selector. Okay, so these methods allow you to access element using CSS selector syntax. That is the best part of it. That's why actually most people use them. It is the way we write our CSS is the same way we write here in the query selector methods. That is the most important thing why we normally use the query selector. So the query selector returns a reference to the first element that matches. By the way, speaking of which, here we have 2 methods for your own information. This, it's just like it's one method. This is a method on its own, and even this is its method on its own. I wanted to bring them at once so that you see them. So this is a method to select one element, and this one is a method to select all. Okay, so the query selector itself, this is the one which selects one item. You can see returns a reference to the first element that matches the specified selector, or null if no element is found. On the other hand, query selector all returns a collection of all elements that matches a specified selector. Okay, or an element, an empty collection if no element is found. Okay, so let's dive in and see actually how this one works. So we are going to first start with the query selector, and then we go to query selector all. So what have we not selected so far? So we have not selected, for instance, this H1. So there are very many ways we can select H1. So let me just first give it a class. I will give it also an ID. So let me just call it section heading, and also let me give it an ID of heading. I think I just keep it simple, give it heading. So we have this one. I want to show you how many ways we would select this in CSS. Okay, if we are selecting this H1 in CSS, let me first show you. Of course, the first way we would select H1. We'd select H1 as simple as that, and we could say color green. So if we go now in this one, you see it is color green. The second one, we would select it in which way? The second one, we would use these IDs and classes. Okay, so we would use dot heading, and let's just give it not text transform, but let's give it text decoration. So text decoration underline. In fact, strike, let's strike. Is it called strike through, or it is called line through? Maybe. Is it line through? So you see that? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just giving it line through. This is now selecting it using the heading. We can even select it using the ID. So it also has ID of heading, and we could go and give it what now? Let's say give it text transform. Why not? Text transform, and let's put in uppercase. Yep. So you can see we have used 3, even that is not even 3. We still have one more to go. We can select it from the container. Okay, we could just say dot container, and we could say H1. Look at that. And we could just say now what property would give. I could give a background color. Let me give antique white, like so. Yep. So you can see how many multiple ways we have selected this H1. Now these are the same things how you would select this element using the query selector. Okay, so let me just go here in the JavaScript. So we are on the method now, query selector. So query selector, we could just say const heading, okay, is equal to document dot query selector, and query selector is for selecting the first instance or only one item, and we pass in now the selector. So the selector, the first one you saw, is H1, so I can simply pass in H1, as simple as that. And let's console.log heading, and if you go to the browser here, you see we actually have our heading H1, all of it H1 element. And by the way, that's why I always put this one EL to remind me this is the element. You might think we are selecting the heading itself. Welcome to This Hub Coding School. No, we are selecting the whole element on it. This is the whole element. Okay, so the second method or the second way is by calling its class. So I copy that and I go here, instead of H1 I simply put dot heading, just like that. You see, it still gives us the same thing. It still selects it. Okay, we could just go ahead and put the class. So the ID, not the class, the ID, simply copy that and here give it like that and go back to the browser. You see, we still select it here. Okay, this is great. So you're seeing all the methods. We can even go ahead and use this one. Just copy the way it is in CSS, or the way you would have written it in CSS, like so. Go here and you still have it. Okay, you can of course refresh. Okay, and you still have it here. So you see, this is the reason why we actually like this query selector. Query selector, if you are familiar with CSS, actually making those selection of elements is much easier. And you can see it can select using classes. So all these ones, the above, it actually replaces all of them. Okay, it can select using the ID, it can select using the tag name, it can select using the class name, it can select even using a query, a whole query, by like you write in CSS. And the query selector, we are going to be using query selector most of our time, but I wanted to show you all these other methods that we can use. Okay, so now let's select all the buttons using the query selector. So remember, all the buttons here in HTML, they have this ID. Okay, they have this ID. So last time when we selected them in here, the join buttons, we used element by tag name, but right now we can use query selector all. So let me put here query selector all. Okay, so could you say const button elements, remember the elements, you're selecting the elements, not the text, the elements, the button elements themselves. So you could say document dot query selector all, query selector all, and this one is going to select all of them with an ID join btn. Okay, so let's go ahead and console this. Okay, console.log btn elements. So when you go back to the browser, voila, you have a node list. Now we have been looking at HTML collection, okay, but now the name changes to a node list, but it remains actually an array. So it is not a node list. I don't say that a node list is an array. Nope. A node list is an iterable object, meaning it looks like an array, but it is not actually an actual array, but it is iterable. That means you can perform all some of the methods that we looked at. Okay, we can perform methods we looked at. For instance, you can do, for instance, console.log, for instance, button elements dot length. Okay, you can do dot length because it is iterable. It is behaving exactly like what, like an array. So you could call it an array, but you're going to see that they are different. Okay, some methods that don't work on this one. Okay, so great. So you can see this method, the query selector or method, is very, very powerful. Okay, and the advantage on it is that we are able to use our selectors the way we want from CSS, and I find this very, very nice and very easy to cope up with. So let's stick onto that method. We are going to be using that one in accessing most of our things. Okay, so at this point we have covered creating elements and accessing elements in the DOM. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how do we delete an element from the DOM. So if you have an element and you want to delete it or you want to hide it, how would you do that? So to remove an element from the DOM using JavaScript, you can use the remove child method of the parent element or the remove method of the child itself. So here we have two methods. I want you to get me clearly. So I have this one. This is the remove child here. So if you use this remove child method, you must use it on the parent element. Okay, or you can use the remove method itself, not remove child, but remove itself on the child itself. Okay, so how do we remove? The steps to be taken. The first is get a reference to the element to be removed. So you can just select the element you want to remove. Element document with get elements by element by ID. Get element. You can use query select, of course. And then the second thing is get reference to the parent element if you are going to use remove child. So we have the child, okay, and we have also the parent. So parent get element the parent node, and you can actually just use this very element itself and you get its parent by using this method parent node. Okay, now to remove the child, you could just simply say parent remove child and you pass in the name of the child you want to remove. This is pretty easy, right? So for instance, let's say we want to remove the button that is in the footer. Okay, let's say you want to remove the button in the footer, this one. So the first thing, of course, is we first select both of these ones. Okay, we are going to first select the button, this button. We could select this button, okay, and you could select also this footer. Okay, so how would you select this button? Of course, if it was in CSS, this would be easy. Okay, we would say, for instance, footer, since it's an element, and put space, put button. This one will select automatically, so background color blue. So let's check this in the browser. So let's check out this button, and you see the button in the footer will become blue. That is a selector we can use to select the button. Just get this one, come here, and you could say const footer button. Const footer button is equal to document dot query selector and pass in the selector here, which is that footer button. Great. Next, select the parent. Okay, so const, okay, footer button parent, footer button parent. Of course, if we wanted, we could also use query selector here. We say document.query selector footer, as simple as that. But if you wanted to select it from the footer button itself, you could just say footer button dot parent node. Okay, so if you now console.log, let's first console.log parent node, okay, not this one, but footer btn parent. So if we go here, I want to see, and yeah, voila, we have the footer here. You see that? Okay, so from the footer we can apply a method called, so we could just say footer or footer btn parent, which is the footer, and we have one which is remove child. Okay, so remove child takes in the name of the child, which is actually footer btn. As simple as that. So if you run that and you go back, the button is gone. Like it is typically deleted. It is not there. You see that? It is gone. It is not there. Okay, this is great. Great. So the steps here, select the item you want to remove, select its parent in either way you want. You can use parent node, it is short. Just from this item itself, you can choose its parent, and then you can, on its parent, you can remove the child, and you specify that very child you want to remove. So that is great. Let's move on. Of course, you can use the remove element itself. Okay, so instead of saying this, using this one, so if I put this one off and the element is back, is there, we could use on this footer button itself, we could call a method. So footer btn dot remove. So we have the remove method actually. Okay, so let me just first put here we're looking at removing items, and we are looking at two methods, the remove child and remove itself. Okay, so remove child, you use the parent to delete the child, but remove is actually on the child itself or on that very actual item. And you can see footer btm dot remove. If you call that one, it is also gone. Okay, so that is great. This is great. We are doing well, and if you're liking this content, please give it a thumbs up, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel so that we can keep on making this wonderful content for you. Okay, so next, deleting elements can also get keep in mind that once the element has been removed from the DOM, it can no longer be accessed or modified using JavaScript. If you want to keep the reference to the element for later use, you can store it in a variable before removing it from the DOM. Okay, so you can see you want to remove an element, so get a reference to the element to be removed. So var element document get element by id. So this is the element they want to remove. To store the element, so here store the reference to the element in a variable. So var removed item is equal element. So here they are storing it here at this point so that they can access it in the future. So you remove the element that remove, this one makes it disappear, but you can still use this element. So use the removed element like console.log removed element, and it is still accessible because here you stored it somewhere and here you removed it, but actually they keep track of it even when it is removed. So if you don't do this step here, you will never see it again. That's what I'm trying to say in that case. Okay, so I think we can do modify element attributes, but I never wanted to do this. I think this could be the end of this lecture, so let's stop here for today's video. I don't want the video to be too long. Let's stop at this in today's video, and in our next video we are going to continue with DOM manipulation. We still have a lot to do, manipulating CSS, adding classes, adding events, and all those nice stuffs. So just know it is the beginning of the nice things to come. So today has been DOM manipulation with me, JB, web developer. Please subscribe if you are not subscribed, and join our WhatsApp group to get access to other developers, and even you can ask me questions right in there. Thank you so much for being around up to this point. And by the way, if you have watched all the videos up to this video, congratulations. This is good energy, and I'm telling you, you're going to become a good developer. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.